thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Beth. Welcome to this much anticipated talk. We are so thrilled to have Jonathan's exhibition here, Scenes of Change, Upper Valley, 1968, 1975. I didn't live here, but I sure have heard about it, and I know you, most of you here were very important part of what took place during those years. I'm Bente Torjussen, I'm director of AVA Gallery and Art Center, and I'm just going to confess, if it hadn't been for Jonathan and Beth, I wouldn't be involved with AVA Gallery and Art Center. Wow. No. You don't remember, but I remember.
Are you applying my memories?
No. You have to give credit to yourself, because when we, soon after Clifford and I and our two daughters moved here to the Upper Valley, I was completely lost trying to find my way. I moved from Florence, Italy, came to Norwich, Vermont, and I was told about this gallery, the AVA Gallery. And we went to Hanover, we climbed up some stairs, we came to these 3 small rooms, and there was the exhibition, photographs by Jonathan Sahara. Those were there was a series of the most magnificent portraits, and that gave me hope.
I just remember being transfixed by her.
So that gave me hope, and I said, maybe we should stay here. And a few years afterwards, I became more deeply involved with AVA, and that's thanks to Beth. So you have been so important for this organization's growth and development. So I want to thank you both for all that you have done. And we are so thrilled that you are here. And it is so meaningful to have this exhibition right here in this place. Margaret Jacobs, our exhibition coordinator who organized the exhibition together with Jonathan who hung it, will say a few words about Jonathan. It probably is almost, I shouldn't say Margaret, redundant, because most people here know Jonathan very well, but it's part of the formal introduction, and it's also being filmed for the CATV. So welcome and thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Margaret Jacobs. I'm AVA's exhibition coordinator. I'm going to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan Sadaf, presently of Montreal, Quebec, received his bachelor's from Dartmouth College and studied with minor White at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He grew up in Woodstock, Vermont, and worked as a professional photographer in the Upper Valley from 1976 through 1991. In 1980, he created a long series of portrait photographs for the cover of the BPR program guides. His main interests as a photographer have been portraiture, street photography, and pictures of social change. In the 1990s and early 2000s, he was active in community issues, especially low-income housing and community organizing. In 2008, he and his wife moved from Hartford, Vermont to Montreal. This exhibition displays a selection of photographs from his book, How Many Roads? The book, a 3-year project, contains a selection of photographs, the majority of which were taken in the Upper Valley during the late 1960s and early 1970s. Photographs depict a nation divided by war, the increasing corporate domination, and the counterculture that was built up around the opposition to the Vietnam War. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan.
Gee, thank you very much, everyone. I'm so pleased to see so many people here and so many friends. And so many people who were in the pictures originally. There was a suggestion, Jack had made a suggestion that everybody who's in a picture should line up next to their picture. But I have to admit that in the process of doing this book, I don't know, I thought I would know a bit about what would happen, but there have been so many surprises about it. And I think one of the biggest surprises has been a comment that people have made to me which was that we wanted to buy the book to find out who you were. And I was just surprised by that comment, but I think that I want to start, I'm going to try and end at 6:15, so I'm going to try and go very quickly. But I want to talk in 3 parts. I'd like to do a little bit about myself at the beginning, and then I'd like to talk about the show of photographs. And then I'm going to show a whole group of, a cluster of photographs that are related to these, but are a much larger area and might be interesting to you in terms of putting everything into context, because these pictures were very much chosen to be the Upper Valley, and I wanted this show to be like that. But I was born. When I was born, my parents had just basically arrived from Beirut. My mother was Armenian, and my father was Syrian, born in Damascus. And they were immigrants, and I've become much more sensitive to immigrants, being both the son of immigrants, and then we moved to Canada where we've become immigrants again. So I'm pretty aware that I acted, when I think back on myself, a lot of my feelings and a lot of my growing up was involved with having been in an immigrant family. And I think my brother, who's 11 years older, felt that much more than I did. I was kind of a transitional kid. I was in the middle. And then my sister, really, who's here too, was much more, she was more integrated. I felt kind of always on the edge of acceptance within Woodstock. Woodstock was at that point a pretty small village, but it was a village that was in transition, and it was a transition that was really interesting, because I remember it when I came to be aware as a village where there was the A&P, and you'd go in and there was a counter, and you'd make an order, and the guy had a long stick, and he'd go up, and they'd put together your grocery order into a bag, and it was not self-serve at all. It was really the old-fashioned kind of store. And there was a butcher store. I wish Murray were here, because Murray was... Oh, there's Murray. Okay, well, okay, then we're all talking. Because Murray is really the person I grew up with at that point. It was her family, very largely, that made me feel accepted, because they were the ones who took me in as a member of their family, even though my parents were people who had just arrived. Her family accepted.
They also just arrived. They were immigrants, and in those days, being from New York City, moving into Vermont community, were also, to a lesser extent, but to a certain extent, you were an immigrant. You came from, as they used to say, away.
Absolutely, but in any case, as a child, I was with Murray, and I felt like I had a point of reference and a place where I belonged. And we grew up together in this community that was really at the point of change, where when I remember one of the first things that was that change was when the Houghton family opened up the Red and White, it was called, in the middle of town. It was a room no larger than this gallery, but there were wide aisles in it, and you'd go in and you'd have a shopping cart. And this was like a totally radical idea. I mean, it was within the center of town still. It hadn't moved out to where it moved later on, but it was inside the town, and it started the change that I'm going to try and relate to these pictures and what happened. So the things that really affected me, besides Woodstock, were that in 6th grade, I went to a school that was an organic farming school. This was a boarding school that was in Lake Placid called North Country. And ironically, I said 6th grade, but it was 4th grade. Ironically, Murray and I went there together as well. But this was a school that was started by Antioch students from the 30s who were basically far left-wingers and who were very committed to organic farming, who had Rachel Carson as a big part of their lives at that early point. We're talking quite early. And who brought up the children in the school, which were only 60 kids, in a way that was very radical from what my family understood as reality and from what I would have experienced if I had stayed in Woodstock. And Murray and I were having lunch together, or a snack together this afternoon, and she told me how one of the teachers had said that she had to learn how to write English in order to not be like Mamie Eisenhower. Well, I remember the same teacher. This is Leo Clark. Her name was Leo Clark, and she was an English teacher, saying that she had cried the whole day that she had heard that the bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And these were the things that started me thinking about the world in a different way. It wasn't just those things, because my family, even though they were immigrants, were always very interested in politics and in a larger worldview. And in Anne, she became a political scientist. To me, I became more of a person who was involved or interested in politics and the world around. So North Country was one thing, and this was right at the beginning of what happened to be the media world, what became for us, the Beatles, and I'm speaking to people who know this, so I shouldn't really, but the Beatles and the Kennedy assassination were two things that we all watched together and we experienced together, and especially the Kennedy assassination was something that the whole country sat in front of TVs for the first time and experienced as one country. And I think that had a huge impact on who we became eventually, because things became cultural. It became like, it wasn't social media, but it became a mass phenomena that we were able as a generation to communicate with each other and form the friendships and the associations that became the 1960s and 70s, the period in these pictures. And I have some things I'd like to read. There's a short excerpt from the book where a girl who later became my wife is writing about what it was to her. And she says, they called us flower children, but really we were the children of the Cold War, reared on fallout and expected conflagration. The explosion came finally in 1968. The My Lai massacre happened in March. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April, and Bobby Kennedy in June, while we were taking the New York State Regents exams. I had long hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and spent hours reading and listening to music, playing a half-hearted guitar, and trying to sing like Joan Baez or Joni Mitchell. Part of that summer, I knocked on doors in my hometown to campaign for Eugene McCarthy, witnessing the fissures in our country at close range, as people I'd known all my life either invited me to come in or kicked me out of their houses. The first day of my senior year, we stood around the black tables of the physics lab and listened to two kids who had managed to go to Woodstock. It wasn't that far from where I grew up. In fact, my cousin, a state livestock inspector, tested the cows for mastitis on Yasker's farm. That December, with the deadlines for our college applications, the Selective Service held the first draft lottery for everyone born between 1944 and 1950. We were 2 years younger, but we knew what was coming. The Thunderheads were piling up. the leaves turning upside down in the wind. Country Joe and the Fish sang Fixing to Die Rag. Jimi Hendrix demanded to know if we were experienced. Everyone was going through the motions of the SATs, college essays, relationships, and career choices, but none of us were sure we'd live to grow up, or what life would be like if we did. There's also an essay that White Alverson, who's also here, wrote for the book, just telling about the things that happened in this period. And I'd like to just really quickly, each one of this is a paragraph, but I'd like to just say some of the things because it's really amazing when you think back on how much change was in this period. I mean, you have 1954, the desegregation order, Brown versus the Education Board. I mean, each one of these things. 1961 to 64, the military escalation in Vietnam under Kennedy. You have 1963, President Kennedy is assassinated. 64, the war on poverty. 65, the Voting Rights Act. 65, the Watts riots. I mean, just each one of these things. McCarthy and Robert Kennedy declaring candidacy in 67. 68, the Tet Offensive. The Model Eli massacre in 1968. 68, Martin Luther King assassinated. 68, Robert Kennedy assassinated. 69, landing on the moon. 69, the Woodstock Music Festival. 70, Cambodian invasion. 70, Kent State. 71, the Pentagon Papers. 72, Nixon's impeachment, or call for his impeachment, and the whole Watergate scandal. I mean, going through all that period and finally his impeachment. And it was a huge sequence of events that affected us enormously, each one of us enormously. And on a local basis, Dartmouth was shut down for the spring term. John is smiling. I mean, on a local basis, there were so many things that happened, starting with the student activism around ROTC, the involvement of the college with ROTC, and SDS meetings, which led eventually to the takeover of Parker's Hall, and Peterson, the governor, calling in National Guard and state police to arrest student activists, of which there are pictures here of the whole thing happening. So from a local and personal level to a much larger level, it was a period of huge tumult, and it was something that these pictures touch on. I think the pictures in the book have more of that in them, but it was really out of that period and out of who I was as a person that a lot of these pictures developed. So I don't know if I've helped explain myself that much, but that's a little bit about how I was coming. But I think that change, the change from where the red and white started in Woodstock, which I mentioned, to the development that started in this area, became something that I was very interested in. And I recorded things like the beginning of Quechee Lakes, which to me was sort of it was a watershed. It was a period where corporations started coming into the Upper Valley and starting developments which were basically second home. That was a second home development, and it was something that I felt was a flashpoint. It was something that I felt was interesting to photograph. And I want to read the copy that was in one of the Quechee Lakes ads from that period. which was, there's a place where there's no smog, no strikes or riots, no neon, no pizza joints, no things that go beep in the night. A place where the land is generous with its gifts, where man can build a leisure home or condominium for his family to escape, or to play, or to retire in a way, and to know that it has been insulated against change. It's called Quechee Lakes, Vermont, the all-year leisure community for weekends or forever. So, I don't mean to pick out Quechee Lakes because really I spent a lot of time photographing Rich's department store, for instance, which really steamed me a lot, but in retrospect, Rich's was really pretty innocuous. But to me, those were the flashpoints of what was happening as change in the Upper Valley, and the changes in that part, that plain where the development, the commercial development started, were something that I photographed over and over again, really up until, well, today I was there photographing it, so I guess I'm still doing it as well. But, so basically, I think the area moved from a service and tourist kind of industry to the kind of development that we've had, where we have now we have large institutions. Dartmouth has become a much larger institution. DHMC has become a much larger institution. We've become a much bigger and diversified area from what we were previously, which were these, and Peter would really also for Bridgewater. I mean, each one, if you think back to the small manufacturing mills and things that we had, this is a very different area because of the development that happened. And in retrospect, you know, I've changed from who I was when I was younger, and I understand it in different ways, but I think the basic impetus is interesting, why I photograph this stuff, and why, and to have it exist now. It's an interesting thing to look back on, and I'd like to talk about it honestly. And in that spirit, I have writing from a journal of that period, that's my writing, that I rewrote when I was about 15 years later. And I'd like to read it, as if you're understanding, it's a journal from 1971, and just in that period. And then I'm rewriting it, and now I'm editing it down a bit. But I'd like to read it to you. There weren't a lot of things that Nixon got right, but he hit it straight on when he sneered at our markers: drugs, sex, and rock and roll. But he had more trouble understanding where the other ideas we cared about: justice and fairness, the respect for the environment, the consequences of hydrocarbon addiction, and the possibility that small carried merit. The constant expansion and bigness carried a price. As a generation, we instinctively headed the other direction. We bought our whole grains from barrels and food cooperatives, and gladly swallowed down our inedible concoctions. No one shaved, and instead of synthetic fibers, we wore natural ones. The formula was easy. Take the inverse of the 1950s. We were rebelling not just about the war, but at the mind-numbing plastic culture of convenience. We headed back to the land, to an ideal of self-sufficiency, slowness, collective cooperation, and work done with our own hands. The fall came and the morning frost started. A few valleys away, there was a house owned by friends that needed to be cared for during the winter. Cold and totally desolate, it was insulated only by pine boughs that we laid against the outside walls and by thick translucent plastic that flapped a lot in the winds. And there was a lot of wind. We watched as hungry deer arched their backs up and ate on their hind feet from the apple trees in the deep moonlit snow. We often had to hike a long way in from the road where the road ended, carrying food and everything else up icy and often dark paths. I rigged up a wood stove-heated water immersion system for developing film, washing the developed rolls in the frigid stream of gravity-fed water that was always flowing from the kitchen tap. For income, I photographed a dance company, this was Pilatus, and did promotional posters and a slideshow, and my girlfriend sewed costumes and sold intricate applique print quilts to anyone who could afford them. The winter sun would come up early, and even in its wan form, the long angle made beautiful light throughout most of the day. There was no electricity, only propane gas for a refrigerator and a small stove. We used kerosene lamps and candles for night. Mostly we cooked on an old wood-burning Glenwood stove. We had a huge two-handled crosscut saw with which we tried to cut wood out of a log pile. Finally, an older man with a chainsaw took pity on our situation and cut the logs. This was Harlow Lent, if any of you knew, and cut the logs down to stove length, ready for us to split. There wasn't a lot of advanced planning involved, so of course the wood was still sizzling wet. Luckily, the stoves were loose and funky, so there wasn't a lot of creosote. The house wouldn't have stood a chance if there had been a fire anyway. Built on a marginal hilltop land by early settlers, it was already headed into its cellar hole, even as we slept in it. In the upstairs bedroom, away from a small area where we lived, a 19th century builder had scratched a poem into the wet plaster. Believe it or not, cold water is hot. It's all in the way that you feel. What you call a dream is just really steam, and the world goes round like a wheel. For people living like this, there was an underground system of support centering on the most important things: keeping warm, fixing cars for transportation, finding places to stay. Homes such as they existed were open to people who needed them, and friendships seemed like they would last forever. Music was dulcimers, congas, kalimbas, and flutes. But even then, there were hints of what was coming. People were experimenting with yurts. Though the first ones caved into salad bowl shapes under the deep snows, later ones were strung together in clusters. Other friends tried building their own houses. Often they were experimental in design. There were attempts at geodesic domes, but like the yurts, they were almost impossible to live in. Curves didn't melt very well with board-straight building materials, but it didn't matter that much. We maintained the illusion of something better to come, though always there was the problem of finding money and finding a way to have enough. It would be easy to dismiss the period as one of upheaval and rebellion, but we really believed that there was a chance that our generation would lead the United States in a different direction. It was an idealistic and unrealistic chance, though. What was clearly different was what was happening to the countryside. Scale and distance were changing. Media brought the war closer. The roads brought outside closer. Where rural communities had been self-sufficient and well-defined, edges began to blur. People drove further, and faster to find land they liked and could afford to build on. At first, there were the two-stroke Saab 96s, which allowed easy access to marginal lands. But then they were followed by all manner of vehicles, which could climb up through snow and mud. But something else happened too. People started to lose connection to where they were because they were always headed somewhere else. Instead of back to the land, it became a travel between places life, or a life of travel between work and home. Roads fed into interstate interchanges that themselves fed into parking lots. The greatest changes were happening in the more settled valleys. There the interstates and their exit ramps were the harbingers of huge change. It was simple. As people and businesses formed larger and larger clumps radiating out from these road points, more and more investment flowed into the area. Developments were started. People bought houses, not just to live in, but for vacations. Suddenly it was possible to get from Boston to New York to northern New England in the span of several hours. So a home could be empty during the week and then used when wanted as an escape from urban living. Town centers atrophied. What remained was dotted with an occasional mini-mart or branch bank. The more affluent towns added in restaurants and tourist-based businesses. Instead of living communities, people formed work communities. Instead of being neighborhood-based, relationships were formed through work and children. Perhaps the truth was that nothing would ever change by heading away, by walling off in the woods and trying to form something new. After all, roads and wars were nothing new. The first lengthy roads through Vermont were military turnpikes cut by the British to defend the colony. Franchise selling started a century before, in the 1860s, ironically with the Singer-pedal sewing machines that we prize so highly to sew our clothes and our quilts with. But it does seem inconceivable that 40 years later, it would be our generation lying and patching together another questionable war. I always appreciated the beginning of the builder's poem, but maybe it was the end that really counted, that the world goes round like a wheel. That was actually an essay that was written for some of these photographs in a European photo magazine. So I adapted it for here. But I'd like to show you the pictures that I have. There are quite a few, so I'm going to go pretty fast. I'd like to get through them, and if people have questions afterwards, then I'm happy to answer them. But I'm going to go, and I'll talk a little bit during the pictures, but I'd very much like to show them to you. So let's see if I can get the projector all. I think it needs, does it warm up?
Is it,
Yeah, you're good.
It's amazing that even a projector has to boot now. No, it will come out, I think. Now I put these spend a lot of time sequencing these, but I thought it's more interesting to run through these roughly grouped by time, but it gives you more of a feeling, I think, of what the entire time was like. These were actually early pictures in New Haven of a demonstration where William Sloane Coffin, who I'm sure all of you know from locally as well, and Henry Miller and a few other people were up on the podium. But this was a very early demonstration against the war, and the FBI, everybody was flocked into the New Haven Square watching this thing because it was really, there was international coverage of it, and it was a very tense situation because Coffin was being prosecuted at that point for burning draft cards, and you know, everybody, I'm sure, a lot of people remember it. But in fact, there's the picture of them. That's Henry Miller in the far, and William Styron in the close, and Bill Coffin in the middle there. Okay, so this was actually a drive-in theater. This is development of this type of mass stuff. This was a drive-in theater on the Berlin Turnpike, which was one of the first interstates connecting New Haven and Hartford. So it's now dead pretty much, but it was dying and dead at that point. So it was really before me. I mean, I think if you can imagine what, as a teenager, it felt like to have all of this happening, it's no wonder our generation really grew up. I mean, each one of us, I think, expressed it in a different way throughout their lives in terms of commitment to working for different things, but I think it affected all of us. And this man, I don't know if Murray remembers this man, but originally he had a cobbler shop in Woodstock when I was a child, and then he moved to Hanover and had a cobbler shop on the back alley near, and then I think he moved to a place in the Upper Valley Plaza, and I think he's retired now, but this was early, this was very early, and I think in a lot of ways he's kind of symbolic of the changes in the Upper Valley over that period. Bob. And I also photographed Larry, the person, we'll get to that, but this was my own brother, and this is my family, my brother coming back right after the Tet Offensive, and a picture in New Haven, and my niece, who's the small girl in the picture as well.
Working at Prince Valley Haircut.
I don't know if you all remember Tansey's store in Hanover, but that was... I mean, to me, you have the courthouse in the back, which became where the Black Panthers were. That's the New Haven courthouse in the background, and I mean, I found that area. I mean, the sign in the background to me is incredible, but to me, that's a FBI guy watching the demonstration and talking to the New Haven police. I don't know if that's who he was, but it seems obvious.
Is it band what?
Pardon?
Band Beatles.
Yeah. But this was some of the camera over on the right is Swedish TV, I think, and then I don't know who the Vietnamese, I assume that's Vietnamese person. And this man was just standing there with his American flag through the whole thing. There were a lot of Yale students who were opposed to the demonstration, who were in the demonstration as well.
Same guy.
Yeah, same guy. And then you have to remember the World Trade Centers. There will be pictures in New York too, and the World Trade Centers had just been built, so they're brand new at this point, and this is looking through Soho down towards the trade centers. And another early picture. This one was in San Francisco. Portrait of a friend. March on Washington.
Yeah. That's a cover.
Yeah. Those were veterans there. That whole cluster to the right were veterans. It's incredible to me how old, it's just fiberglass helmets and face visors compared to what is now.
That's what I was saying, the contrast between then and now
Yeah.
is just chilling.
Yeah. This was an early sit-in in Parkhurst before the building. This was before, it wasn't the same day as the building takeover. And in 105 Dartmouth. And you can probably recognize some of the people in those pictures. That's Fred Haas up in the corner there, I think, isn't it, John? And third from the top right. This was the night that the police came into Hanover. And relatives visiting people, Dartmouth students in jail.
I recognize him.
That's
It's amazing.
And Hoyt, how old were you in that picture?
27.
27. So you were just out of graduate. That was your first year
Yale,
teaching
yeah.
at Dartmouth.
Yeah. 68. I broke my leg skiing.
Hey, our crunchers, clearly.
I didn't notice that.
Leonard Reeser, do you mind my interruption?
No, please.
Leonard Reeser came in on that occasion and said, "Hoyt, I'm holding you responsible for anything that happens." He was the dean of the faculty and the provost. I was.
You were an
I was
assistant professor at that.
Assistant professor. Pardon?
That's his father.
In the 50s, 40s, 50s.
The Lenny you know, and is his father. I mean,
His son.
Lenny is the son of the Leonard who was.
This was Leonard Reeser, the father.
The late
No, no, no.
great. This was late great Leonard Reeser.
This is the
Yeah,
Leonard
yeah, this
Reeser,
is
the
the
father.
Leonard Reeser.
And the physics
Oh,
professor?
sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Became president of Case Western after he left his papers?
No, that was,
Sorry.
you're mixing up.
Sorry.
with,
Sorry.
You're
He
confusing
started
them.
his provost career early.
He moved between two positions.
Can I say something about this? This is Don Cherry, and I think, the pictures of Don, which are just this wall here, could easily be a huge gallery of pictures because he was someone that actually John Appleton invited to teach at the college, who had a huge impact on the Upper Valley. Well, he had a huge impact in general, but he was a very visible person in the Upper Valley, and affected me a lot. But I think that's his mother in Watts. this was a good friend of mine. He stayed a good friend who was the NYU student body had taken over the library and had taken over this printing press, which they had absolutely no idea how to operate. But they were printing strike posters on it, and my friend Johnny was covered with ink and quite photogenic for the. And this is actually in Lyme. This is John Cherry's daughter. Yeah, really.
His face suits him, you know?
Yeah, you really can't forget that face. This is in Pompanesett coming down.
That is pumping. Oh, yeah.
You'll all recognize it.
Okay.
That's one thing your book points out, is the importance of the idea of a military mobility as the basis for selling the interstate highway system. I think that's been lost in a lot of popular consciousness. It was a purely military project.
Well, I think there was also I think from the 1920s, the proposal for the interstate system had a large economic, and it was decentralization of economic development, really, that was part of it as well as the military part. But Eisenhower certainly
Sold it.
yeah,
The selling point.
absolutely military. And I wish I could do just a show on Don Cherry, because there were so many pictures of that period of him alone. And George McGovern this was at Dartmouth during one of the, and they all always come to Hanover to talk, so. To me, there are two kind of iconic pictures. One is this picture, and the other one I love is just to the left of the screen, that couple in front of there. It's in Kentucky, well, it's near Kentucky, the couple, but this was in Norwich. Well, it was close, it was more like Goodrich Four Corners. And this would be right where the Walmart is now, is where the barn is in the background. You can see the mountain already being blasted. Yeah. I put this in because I think this, I'm not sure what this is, but I think this is Charlie Kelton's original franchise to bring foreign trucks into the Upper Valley, and he was storing them on a farm which must have been up towards, well, it must have been north of,
Isn't that Route 14?
well, it's from 89, so it would be 14 that you're looking at, yeah. Maybe, do you,
It's West Hartford.
is it West Hartford? Yeah. Okay.
Dotson, doesn't it say?
Yeah, Dotson's were
Dotson.
like, it was radical to have, you can see the American cars around. And bringing the Dotsies in was pretty radical. This was Don's teaching space in Hasveda in Sweden. And those are actually neighbors of Liz. This is what I was photographing today. It's the closed gas station that's in the Upper Valley right now. I mean, in the shopping plaza. I mean, look at that. There's nothing around it. It's completely empty. And that sign now is just blank, which makes it even more. It's standing there if you look and completely blank. This is going into Norwich.
Yeah, from Hanover to
Yeah. This is Cook's Farm. It's right on the flat before Goodrich Four Corners. And when I was writing about the winter light, this was the Glenwood stove that I was writing about. Making yogurt. To me, at that age, this was the height of unattractive environments, but it was the eastern terminal in Logan.
That is Logan.
Yeah, that's Logan.
Looks good now.
Long gone at this point. You probably all recognize a lot of this. This was Goodrich Four Corners. Early, this was shopping center in West Road. I guess this has to be an iconic picture as well.
Where is that?
This is right. This is the current McDonald's.
Where the current McDonald's is?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's the original farm in the background, though. I love this one just because of the Carter's overalls. But this is the same person with the ink smeared all over his face.
His pants
Dollar bill in his hair. Yeah, but it's Hirsch's. It's Hirsch's in the.
That's Hershey. That is Hershey. Like that.
And it was made here in this building.
Pardon?
Carter's
The overalls were made here.
Yeah, that's the Carters were made in this building, and the overalls were made in this building. This was in the center of Norwich, under the bridge. Yeah,
Not the Norwich Pool.
on Elm Street, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was right there in Hudson, Mechanic Street, where
Right.
it goes in
Mechanic
Hudson.
Street.
Right near your house, wasn't it, John? Yeah.
Is that Steve?
Tozer. Yeah. This was the cabin right to the left of the bridge and Levy Bridge that existed there for years. It was his woodshed there. And here's early, this is when Rich's first opened, so there are pictures in Rich's. This was before there were rules against doing things like this. I know, if I tried to do this in a Walmart now, I'd be intercepted immediately. You have no rights to photograph anywhere anymore. I think it was Murray who took me to there originally, so this is right in conflict. Yeah, it looks like 100 years ago when I look at these pictures. This was after the West Side Drive collapsed, so it was closed down. And the World Trade Centers were brand new at that point. That's the one I was saying I think is iconic. And I love the carefulness of the patching on that. Look at those patches, just the patches. This was Berlin Turnpike again, between Hartford, Connecticut and no, it's not here. Logan. Bridges.
And what are those?
Those are big foam $100 bills.
They just foam $100 bills.
What did they do with them?
I have no idea. I have no
That's what
idea.
you call inflation.
It's hard currency made soft.
Very soft.
Oh, here's Larry. This is, you know, you may have known him. I think he's retired now, but he worked at the Co-op gas station.
That's Larry?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That
That's
was,
wild. He's in Florida now.
he is?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is when he worked at Manchester's in the center of town. That's Robbie Barnett.
No, well, he was at the,
So that one.
Manchester's was.
There's Gene McCarthy and Renee. Which is the same guy? As in the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the same guy.
Can't make
Steve Lewis.
Yeah.
You probably all recognize his name. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you. I don't know if you've got, let's see how I did for, oh, I'm way longer. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. But I know a lot of people have to leave. If anyone wants to ask questions,
Jonathan,
yes.
the title of your book is really elusive and pregnant with meaning. How many roads? And after the last decade of hubris and stupidity and greed in Iraq, it makes me wonder how many roads we travel down before we get it. Do you have any thoughts on what Teju Cole said was, I thought, be pregnant. It's so contemporary, and yet that breeds, in my mind, a kind of depression almost. No matter how many times we go through this, we seem to start the next war with the same mental set.
I think our generation really hoped that there'd be an examination of what we were doing and how it would affect the future, and we would change things. And I mean, for instance, if we had made a choice to diversify hydrocarbons and use other fuel sources, I think that the development of the country was and is very tied to this freedom of movement that the interstates represent. But I think that at the same time, if there had been a diversified fuel base, so that, for instance, the agreements with the Saudis had not been as crucial as they have been to the development of this country, that it would have been a much healthier situation and would have led to less conflict and a healthier development. I mean, not healthier, but I don't know what.
Less afraid with risk.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had a chance at that point to do something like that, and it didn't happen. And I think we're paying a huge price for that now because of it. And I would say that our generation certainly didn't have the effect that we hoped it would have. I mean, I really believe that, I didn't know what year the change would happen, but I know when I was young that I believed that maybe it would be 1975, maybe it would be 1976, but there'd be a revolutionary change in terms of how the government and how things worked. And, obviously it didn't happen, but I can't tell you, how much I hoped that was what would happen, and it didn't. So, I think it was all of our hopes. So.
In seeing many of those pictures, I mean, they could have been taken yesterday. And that was what struck me, especially the one of the guys sleeping in the city street there. I mean, you multiply that a number of times, and we have that. And the policeman you showed, and the contrast between them in essentially woolen jackets compared to what we have now, and gets a little icy in the mind as a result. Quite icy.
Well, I have to say, from a personal point of view, I mean, doing this show, I really have appreciated everybody's support and the feedback I've gotten from the community and all of you being here. And I'm sorry that this took a lot longer than I really thought I was within the time limits. So, thank you all very, very much for coming.